Hello and welcome back to the Retro Perspective series covering each and every issue of the official PlayStation magazine. This time we have issue number 13 from December of 1996. As editor Rob Pegley says in his opening note, this issue is absolutely packed with previews and reviews. On page 8 we have an interview with video gaming's own pillar of honesty and integrity. It's Peter Molyneux. He was working on Dungeon Keeper at the time and of course says that it's the best game he's worked on so far. Molyneux says that he thinks the PlayStation is lacking a really good platform game and also a game that could become synonymous with PlayStation like Mario is to the Nintendo 64. I guess Peter Molyneux had never heard of Crash Bandicoot at the time. But also I think that Adventures of Lomax and Rayman are both pretty damn good in terms of platform games. On page 12 we have a short preview for one of my favourite PlayStation 1 games, Wild 9. However, these screenshots seem to be of very early development and look nothing like what the game turned out to be. Next up, a detailed preview of the upcoming sequel Reloaded here. The game promised to be more than the mindless shooting the original top-down game was criticised for, and sporting two-player link-up to boot. An interesting note that I didn't know before, the characters and artwork were designed by 2000 AD artist Jason Brassill. Reloaded was a much talked about game as a kid because for whatever reason most people seem to only have the chipped version of the game, and we all assumed that it had been banned even in the UK for its gory themes and characters. On page 20, a preview for a game I was obsessed with, although more so its sequel, Command & Conquer Red Alert. These games on PlayStation were actually pretty damn good and had some exclusive missions as well. The magazine says, one of the worries we harboured regarding a console adaptation of such a fast-paced and intricate strategy game was the implementation of the control system. In the PC version you use a mouse, but as was the case with the conversion of Mindscape's Warhammer, the PlayStation couldn't maintain an acceptable speed while trying to cope with a mouse-driven interface, so it's joypad controlled only, we're afraid. But in the long term it turns out to be a definite bonus. Comparing the two versions, this next-gen adaptation runs noticeably faster than its PC forebear. Having later played the PC version though, I can pretty safely say I would rather take keyboard and mouse controls with this kind of game, and I'm not sure whether the idea of the PlayStation running it faster was strictly true. I guess maybe it just meant at the time you had to have a pretty expensive PC that most people wouldn't have. I had a pretty bog standard Packard Bell PC around the time that Red Alert 2 came out, and I have to say that speed never seemed an issue to me. It was only when Command & Conquer Generals came out and it was like a fully 3D engine that the slowdown really became an issue for anyone not running a modern PC. Pandemonium next. This is a very well known PS1 title, and I must admit I've never played it myself, only played the demo, but I remember the demo very fondly. The magazine says the levels have been designed to give the impression of a non-linear structure. Although Crash employed a clever use of 3D in the forced perspective seen in many levels, Pandemonium uses clever 3D at base level. Causeways twist and turn, rotate and weave to give the players the feeling of full freedom within the 3D environment. Crash often returned to the straight up, down, left, right kind of 2D approach, but Pandemonium opts for new tactics. There's always some kind of clever use of 3D to generate depth, no matter how small that effect may be, whether it's a simple skew of the camera or elaborate background detailing showing the rest of the level snaking off into the distance. Since 3D was the hot new thing and 2D games were being increasingly maligned by games media as antiquated relics of the past, Capcom were set to release their first 3D fighter, Star Gladiator. Star Gladiator once more demonstrates that pixelated fisticuffs is what Japanese codehouse Capcom do best. In terms of looks, it's an obvious rival to Tekken 2. Gone is the comic book slant and block coloured sprites of the Street Fighter Alpha games, replaced instead by garage shaded polygons and texture mapped backgrounds. Similarly, the camera pans, zooms and rotates to capture the explosive 3D action. Not to be outdone by Namco's Tekken 2, Star Gladiator also kickstarts with a lavish 3D rendered intro. Although in graphical terms the change is quite dramatic, Star Gladiator still plays with all the intuitiveness of the original Street Fighter engine. Most people consider this the finest combat engine in existence. Moreover, the familiar features of that engine also remain, such as energy bars, easily executed attacks and special moves, combos, swift responses, and varying difficulty levels. It's the opponents though which are worthy of particular note, a completely original lineup of fantastical fighters, each of which packs an impressive arsenal of attacks. Another beat 'em up hoping to challenge the throne of Tekken is Iron and Blood. Bizarrely, Take-Two Interactive thought the Dungeons & Dragons license was the right one to convert into a polygon fighter, at a time when people were clearly clamouring for more RPGs on the PS1, no less. And yet another move to 3D for Konami's Contra series with Legacy of War. Details are scant, but a review is promised in the next issue. Also from Konami, page 39 has the first few screenshots the magazine has published for Suikoden, and finally a release date after months of teasing and reader letters begging for more details. Konami have bitten the bullet and given the school bully an eye-watering wedging in the changing rooms. They've decided to release an RPG. Suikoden is its name, full-on Japanese style. Wander around looking cute and getting into stats-based scraps. The good news is that fans of 16-bit RPGs will find its graphical style and general mode of operation comfortingly familiar, and the better news is that while retaining the traditional format, the game introduces enough graphical flourishes, glorious soundtracks, and neat special effects to make you feel that the purchase of your PlayStation was money well spent. On to the reader letters section now, and once again we have several people writing in to complain about the demos being poor quality. I don't really see where they're coming from here, especially because people to this day are still interested in these demos and have a lot of nostalgia for them. But here's a couple of other letters that I found a bit more interesting.
False economy. Practically every single game you review costs $44.99. Obviously, the software producers have to make a profit, but in common with producers in the music and computer industries, they pitch prices high and sell a few instead of many at a lower price. Where's the sense in selling 1,000 at £15 against 20,000 at £8? PlayStation games are only one element in an ever-increasing choice of entertainments across radio, cable, satellite, PC, video, etc. To give one example, I can have 24 hours of non-stop radio programs for £8 a month through my cable provider. If you, PlayStation game producers, and Sony want to maintain the success of the PlayStation, then I suggest that you all do something about the price of games, and quickly. £300 is a small amount to forget against a continuing charge of £45 per game. Cable modems are on the horizon. The PlayStation may well be obsolete sooner than you think. Dust down your CV.
The old games are too expensive chestnut. Yes, they are too expensive. But at the moment there's no simple solution. And while we agree with your maths, we think your economics are way off. We're not sure where the sales report figures come from, but almost halving the price of a product doesn't necessarily mean that its sales potential will increase 20-fold. There simply isn't the kind of market there. Yes, if you reduce the price of a game, then more people are likely to buy it. The financial wizards behind Sony and other companies surely know more about sales revenues than our good selves, even if their moral fibre is perhaps not as strong. As you say, there are plenty of other forms of entertainment available, in which companies such as Sony have an interest, incidentally, and nobody forces us to play games. We do it because we love it, and we do it in spite of the high prices. So despite your cheery note, we'll leave our CV to collect dust for now, thank you.
Playing cautious. After owning a Mega Drive for a number of years, I finally sold it and bought a PlayStation. Not because Sony's console has a better image and better technical abilities, but on account of the money-wasting years with Sega. Sometime after buying the Mega Drive, I read about the Mega CD, the next level of gaming, and so I bought it. A short time after, I realized that it was not the Mutts Nuts, just a dog of a machine. Then came the 32X. Being more cautious this time, I held back. And of course we know what happened to that. So, out with Sega. I'm a more than happy owner of a PlayStation, but what future is there for the console, peripherals and softwares? Will I be selling a few years down the line? I am a newcomer to the PS market, living in Sega Cuckoo Land. One other thing. Your first demo disc had the music video program which, in its limited way, I found great. Are there any more on the market?
We wouldn't worry too much just yet. A year into the PlayStation's life, no add-ons or hardware changes are on the horizon. To some extent, developers are still only just finding their feet with regard to software, and the market can only get bigger. There are plenty more games to come, and plenty more music programs as well. We'll provide you with details as soon as we can. It seems that readers were very interested in honing their fighting game skills around this time, because someone's written in response to another reader letter asking about multi-hit combos in Street Fighter Alpha. Ken has a 16 hitter, a flying roundhouse, a crouching short 2-in-1 into a level 3 vacuum dragon punch. Keep pressing the kick buttons to get all the hits. Rose has a 22 hitter. Once your super bar is charged to level 3, do a level 1 super soul shadow, then a deep flying roundhouse, a crouching jab, 2-into-1 into a level 2 super soul spark. It seems that all this reader's birthdays had come at once, because if we flip ahead to the top secret section this month, we have a full catalogue of all the moves from every character in Tekken 2, including some ridiculously hard to pull off combos. And if you want to see my feeble attempt at pulling off some of these combos, then keep your eyes peeled on the channel for the next demo playthrough coming in a couple of weeks. On to the reviews now, the first one being the original Tomb Raider. Now, video games up until this point I don't think had seen a game like this. I think Tomb Raider was revolutionary for its time and remains to this day one of the best games ever. So I think it's quite right that PSM gave it a 10 out of 10. Stop what you're doing and pay attention. Tomb Raider is one of the best games you'll ever play. It's one of those groundbreaking games that changes the way games are made forever. One that takes your preconceptions and turns them upside down. One that shows what the PlayStation is capable of. The first thing to impress you is the graphics. Seeing them here reproduced on the page probably doesn't do them justice. You have to see them moving to appreciate how clever they are. Dark, dank caves, secret underground places, massive monuments, they all come alive on your TV screen. Tomb Raider is a game that looks good enough for you to have fun just exploring it. Walking up to things and looking at them, wandering around them, and just marvelling is entertaining in itself. Actually, I disagree with this, because I don't think it's how the game looked and its graphical fidelity that made the game fun to explore. The new Tomb Raider games look amazing, but the level design is terrible. The levels in the original Tomb Raider were very carefully crafted with Lara's exact moveset in mind, which meant that every button press from a player was important. Lara has unlimited freedom to move. Anywhere on the screen that you can see, she can get to. She can walk, run, jump, roll, climb, push, pull, shoot, swim, dive, or just stand still. She's completely controllable with a system that uses every button to do something and often requires combinations, which sounds a bit hard to control, and it is at first. But the great thing is the skill that's gone into the design of the game. There are plenty of other things that help to make Tomb Raider fantastic too. The way that the sinister music swells up at just the right moments, the way that Lara furrows her brow in concentration whenever she aims a gun, and the fact that there are 16 massive levels to explore that should guarantee at least 100 hours of playing before you're finished. There will be times when Lara's up high making long complicated jumps, and you'll look down and experience a very real feeling of vertigo. At other times you'll be in the thick of a fight with lions, dogs, bears, monkeys, dinosaurs and other assorted baddies, and you'll suddenly become an adrenaline charged killing machine. There is, in short, no other game that has ever given you so much of the sensation of being the main character. Rush out and buy this as soon as you see it come into the shops. On the next page, Destruction Derby 2, and I thought the first couple of paragraphs were pretty damn funny. Make no mistake about it, whether you loved it or loathed it, Destruction Derby was a huge success. Personally, a few of us here thought it was a bit cheesy. Technically impressive, maybe, but not a great deal of fun to play. In light of its success though, it would have been all too easy for Psygnosis to leave the format largely unchanged for the sequel. But no, instead they took on board all the criticisms of the original and addressed pretty much everyone. That's right, they actually listened to the public and acted on their wishes. Maybe they should run for government. The game bags a 9 out of 10 from PSM, making it their highest rated racing game so far. Psygnosis have taken a ropey game, packed it with great new features, given the gameplay a total overhaul, and have come up with an A-class racer. Street Fighter Alpha 2 of course gets a very high score, as most Street Fighter games seem to. Custom combos are the biggest change since Street Fighter Alpha 1, and enable you to create your own super combos. In Alpha 2, each character has 2 alpha counters, one with a kick, a low attack, and a punch counter, which is a high or air attack. A related new feature is auto blocking, which will block attacks as long as you're not pressing an attack button. This levels the playing field between experienced fighters and beginners. Those are the technical differences between Alpha 1 and Alpha 2, but there is another important change: the backgrounds. They have transformed from pitiful drab images to colourful and detailed masterpieces. As for hidden characters, there are only 2 that have been discovered: the Chun-Li and Akuma from Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I don't know why they've referred to her as the Chun-Li here. There have been no revolutionary changes to the game, but there rarely are in the Street Fighter series. It is a definite improvement, however, and worth buying even if you've already got Street Fighter Alpha 1. With this Street Fighter Alpha 2 review in mind, it seems a bit hypocritical then that after giving Mortal Kombat 3 a 9 out of 10, PSM gives Mortal Kombat Trilogy a 7 out of 10, despite it being known as like the definitive PlayStation Mortal Kombat game. We were very impressed with Mortal Kombat 3, concluding it to be a fully developed, spot-on conversion of a massive arcade game, all squeezed neatly onto one shiny little CD. Not just a clever conversion of the coin-op, it is the coin-op. That was back in PSM 2. We've since been treated to the Tekkens, Toshindens and a host of other contenders. Mortal Kombat is still regarded as one of the classic 2D beat-em-ups, along with the various Street Fighter guises. The trilogy is essentially a collection of all the characters and locations of the 3 Mortal Kombat games, packaged neatly onto one CD. Mortal Kombat remains a fast, fluid and wholly playable 2D beat-em-up. It's comical too, with an abundance of quirky projectile-chucking characters. Indeed, Tekken seems almost sober in its approach when compared to Mortal Kombat's tomfoolery. It's all jolly good gruesome fun, although Mortal Kombat doesn't compare favourably to our favourite Tekken. But then some gamers prefer the pace of 2D bashers and the wealth of projectiles to the grace and beauty of the polygonal pugilist. If you've already invested in Mortal Kombat 3, however, there really is no reason to purchase this, yet despite its seemingly old-fashioned status, Mortal Kombat remains one of the true brawlers, always prepared to emerge from its corner, fists aloft. Yeah, this review seems just a bit of a cop-out really. I'm not a massive fan of Mortal Kombat or anything, it just seems like they are forgiving Street Fighter where they are criticising Mortal Kombat. Blast Chamber, 7 out of 10. To say that Blast Chamber presents a challenge is like saying it gets a mite chilly atop Snowdon. It's hard, bloody hard. Yes, you can accrue extra lives throughout the game, but careless slips of the thumb rapidly burn through those, so it's not for the slow of mind or the dim. Lateral thinking is in frequent demand, and those demands are high. That's not to say that Blast Chamber isn't fun, you've just got to be a bit of a brain box to work it out in the measly amount of time you've got. Perfunctory graphics are what you would expect for this sort of game. You need to be able to work out what's what and fast, so graphical niceties are dispensed with. Having said that, Blast Chamber does manage to look pretty good. The movement is smooth, the multitudinous power-ups are easy to spot. Thought has gone into designing the way you can shift the camera angles so you can see all around the chamber. It's this kind of extra detail which is appreciated. So it's a puzzle game, only with an extra element, and that is added when you add more players. For within the multiplayer version you have to do more than merely grab the crystal and bung it in the goal. Now you must prevent your opponents from doing the same thing by pushing them over and swinging the blast chamber through its 90-degree shift, whenever possible. This is one I never played back in the day, but it looks pretty cool and I'm looking forward to checking it out at some point. Here's one I did play a hell of a lot though, The Adventures of Lomax, and here's the first time I've really strongly disagreed with a review, I think. Apart from the obvious 10 out of 10 from Tekken, this game is really good. I think it's very similar to Rayman, but I actually think it's better. I much prefer it anyway. Anyway, what did the magazine say? The Adventures of Lomax, starring a lemming out of Lemmings. Indeed, the Lemmings connection isn't hard to spot. There are lemmings all over the place. Lemming speech is in evidence. Oh no, cries Lomax as he croaks for the umpteenth time. Lomax's special abilities are collected from the urns that litter the landscape. Spin into it and the oversized vase releases its booty. A little later you'll be called upon to negotiate some physical hindrance, so you hit select, call up the appropriate ability, and set it to the task. Big deal. And apart from that minor drain on the old grey cells, we're left with an awful lot of edge jumping, coin collecting and landing on baddies. Boy, where have we seen that before? We're treated to a wealth of lush graphical trickery, from rotating sprites and transparency to 4 layers of parallax and scaling scenery. All very nice and pastely, but really Lomax is no prettier than you'd expect on the Super Nintendo. It's easy to imagine that with a bit of Mode 7 cleverness, Lomax could quite easily have been replicated on the 16-bit console. Not as smoothly or impressively, agreed, but a reasonable facsimile nonetheless. And the same goes for the gameplay, we're talking SNES standard again. Yes, it has some clever features like walking into and out of the screen, and yes, it's quite challenging, but this game is being released in the age of Crash Bandicoot and Super Mario 64. We expect more than swinging platforms, rolling barrels, and bouncing catapults. I remember watching a video recently where someone was playing the PlayStation 1 version of Robotron X and saying that it really holds up to this day. So it's interesting then that the PlayStation magazine gives Robotron X a 6 out of 10. PSM says the fact is, and this may seem blasphemous to die-hard proponents of the theory that the old games are the best, the game as a whole is seriously flawed. For the most part, Robotron X serves to throw into sharp focus that the fact that right here and now is where the best games are, and that these older games should be fondly looked upon as part of video games history and nothing more. A lot of people kind of say that now about like PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 games, but they still remain a lot of the best games that are ever made. Tomb Raider being one of them that's covered in this very magazine. So I think they might have been a bit naive saying that, judging by the kind of games we have nowadays. Because if someone were to say the same thing about modern gaming in relation to these PlayStation 1 games, I would say that's absolute bullshit. Because a lot of these games do hold up to this day and are definitely worth playing over a lot of modern games. Another huge release for the PlayStation, and a game that is fondly looked back on to this day, Final Doom gets a 9 out of 10. Never before had games been so immersing. Immersing? That's not a word. Never before had you felt so involved in the action, or been frightened by a computer game. Doom places a towering landmark on the horizon of computer games development, and for a long time it was all that you could see. But that was then, and this is now. Since Doom we've seen Alien Trilogy, and there's a host of other titles such as Duke Nukem 3D and Quake coming along to try and take Doom's crown. They feature slicker graphics and different storylines and make you feel that the PlayStation has moved on. Now Doom's back, and the question is it still as good as it was? Well, initially Final Doom is a little disappointing. It's really only 30 new levels. There are no new weapons or added features, and the overall feeling is that you've seen it all before, but then you start to play it, and you remember everything that's so fantastic about Doom. The way that you can walk, run, hide around corners, and then you remember that you were supposed to be meeting somebody half an hour ago, and that you've already been playing the game for 3 hours, and that you don't want to stop. Next up, another helicopter combat game, which there seem to be quite a lot on the PlayStation. This one gets an 8 out of 10. Black Dawn is one of the best airborne combat games out there. The graphical detail, explosive sound effects, and challenging missions all add up to an action-packed experience. I don't think I've ever really come across this game or heard anything about it, but it does look interesting. And PSM is claiming that this one is the best in its field, so... Okay, this one looks weird. Robo Pit gets a 4 out of 10. Become the Frankenstein of the mechanised world by piecing together bits of robot and then smashing them up. Fighting games can be excellent fun when you've got a good un, but even when you've got a top draw beat 'em up, you're only ever given the choice of predefined fighters. Wouldn't it be great if you could create your own and have them prove their mettle in the ring? That's the theory behind Robo Pit, and a good theory it is too. Shame then that the end product doesn't live up to his promise. The basic premise is that you take bits of robot, legs, arms and heads, put them together and then use your creation to fight other robots in a variety of arenas. There are payoffs to consider in creating your robot. You may want speedy legs, but chances are they won't be able to turn very quickly. You may want a devastating weapon in your left hand, but you'll find it's not very quick at firing, and so on. But it ends up being a rather tedious exercise in trundling around, jumping, shooting, and trying to line up your robot with the opposing robot for a trade of weak punches. Far better that you stick with something like Tekken 2, if it's adrenaline pumping, face bashing action you're after. Oh no, yet another Doom clone, full of violence, ultra powerful weapons, full on action, blood and guts. And it's a Doom clone developed by Insomniac Games, so it sounds pretty good, and it gets an 8 out of 10 as well. Disruptor's overriding strength is its structure, both in terms of the levels themselves and the overall storyline. There are very few areas and enemy appearances that don't seem to serve a very specific purpose. Almost every encounter requires an amount of thought in order to work out the best way to get through unscathed. When you do, the feeling of achievement is tremendous. Then of course the next part of the plot kicks in, presented in surprisingly good FMV, even if the acting is a little poor. Criticisms? Not many. The only real problem is that even on the regular skill level, the challenge is huge, at times frustratingly so, but then there are passwords and memory card options, as well as a few handy continue points mid-level, thus removing much of the frustration. As we've said before, the PS1 seemed to have quite a few violent futuristic sports games, and Pitball is the next one. PSM gives it a 7 out of 10, not quite in the same league as Blast Chamber, though they do say that to date there is nothing to compare with Pitball on the PlayStation. In Pitball, winning is as much about pummeling the opposition with fist and foot as it is scoring goals. Playing with a mere 2 players on each team, over a scant 3-minute stretch, Pitball is a frenetic slap fest. Although the primary objective of each player is to grab a ball made of pure energy, make his way across the small playing pit, and slam the ball home. The game in itself is fun, but the management element is excellent. So much so in fact that the programmers have given you the option of not taking part in the games of Pitball in the league mode. Instead, you can opt to do all the management stuff and let the computer get on with playing your team off against the others. So is the sporty bit any good? Well, to start off with, you get the distinct impression that you're not in control. The PlayStation takes charge of the 3 players in the pit, one of yours and both of the opposition. You can switch between your 2 players by smacking the L1 button, but for the most part you control one guy. The control system is a tad unwieldy, 7 of the 8 buttons are utilised on the joypad, and learning what's what in the heat of the action isn't easy. You do get used to it, but the game takes some perseverance. Next up, another review I strongly disagree with, and probably one of my favourite games of all time, certainly one of the best on the PlayStation. It's Casper, the puzzle game. It seems that PSM took this as a kids game, and they don't seem to like that very much, because that's really the only justification they have for this score. It's well known that people as old as 30 own PlayStations. It's also known that such people sometimes have children. These children, mused into play, might want to play games as well. However, they might not be interested in the types of games their parents play, or more likely their parents might not think most games to be suitable. So why not have a friendly game with lots of little puzzles and perhaps an educational element? I'm not sure what they mean by that, because there's no educational element in this game. Casper is amusing for a while, however children who find him cute are probably too young to get their heads around a computer game. By the time a child develops an interest in the PlayStation, he or she won't be too impressed by the little fella. They'll want something with a bit more action and firepower, just like everybody else. Wow, that's so out of touch. And that's it for this issue of the official PlayStation magazine. As I say, no main feature in this issue, but there was a lot of interesting stuff and some really huge releases for the PlayStation in this one, not least of all Tomb Raider. Thanks very much for watching. I've been Jake of the Retro Perspective, and I'll see you next time.